Good afternoon and welcome to IBA News this Tuesday, the 28th of June. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy, joining you live from Jerusalem. Foreign Ministry Director General Dori Gold and the Turkish Deputy Foreign Minister today initialed the reconciliation deal between Israel and Turkey, which will normalize ties between the two countries after a 6-year hiatus. The agreement will be brought for approval tomorrow at the Security Cabinet. It remains unclear at this time how the ministers will vote, with some already announcing their intention to oppose the deal. Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman stated that while he opposes the deal, he will not publicly campaign against it. Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked and Education Minister Naftali Bennett, both of the Jewish Home Party, announced today they will oppose the deal. A statement issued by Bennett said while reconciliation with Turkey is important for the Jewish state, paying compensation to the families of terrorists who tried to harm the IDF is unacceptable. Aside from Netanyahu, Finance Minister Moshe Kahlon, Housing Minister Yoav Gallant and Energy Minister Yuval Steinitz are all in favor of the agreement. Transport Minister Yisrael Katz, Interior Minister Aryeh Deri and Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan have yet to make their positions known. Other ministers are demanding the deal be brought for a vote at the full cabinet and not at the narrower Security Cabinet. Just hours after Israel and Turkey announced their reconciliation agreement, Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan slammed Israel for its unlawful practices on the Temple Mount and in Jerusalem, saying his country will continue to object to Israel's treatment of the Palestinians. Speaking from his Ankara residence last night, Erdogan said the Palestinians had been updated on the negotiations with Israel all along. He maintained that only after he received approval from Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Hamas leader Khaled Mashal concerning the agreement with Israel was the decision made to continue the negotiations. Despite the stipulation that aid from Turkey will transit via Ashdod, the Turkish president said a ship bearing aid will set sail soon for Gaza, adding that his country will continue to address the grievances of the Palestinian people. He added that Turkey also plans to construct an industrial zone in the West Bank city of Jenin. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has returned to Israel from Rome. Upon his arrival, he invited for a meeting the families of fallen soldiers Oron Shaul and Hadar Goldin, who were killed during 2014's Operation Protective Edge and whose remains are held in Gaza. The families are protesting that the Israel-Turkey reconciliation deal did not include the return of their loved ones' remains and have been pushing legislators to accede to their plea. They are also slated to meet with visiting UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon, who is on the country on a 2-day visit. The Prime Minister conveyed the message to the UN chief during his meeting.
I ask you to use your standing to help return home these soldiers and these citizens. It's a humanitarian position, an elementary humanitarian requirement that Hamas, in its criminal activities, is of course throwing into the winds. Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas has genocidal aims. It doesn't merely practice terrorism. It says openly that its goal is to wipe away from the face of the earth a member state of the United Nations. I hope the UN will highlight Hamas's crimes and understand that our security measures are aimed only at keeping our citizens safe from this threat. And we use judicious force in this regard. I don't know what any other country faced with thousands of rockets and missiles aimed at our citizens, at our children, would do differently. Many have done it differently, and they have not used the restraint and responsibility that Israel uses.
During their meeting in Jerusalem, Netanyahu and Ban Ki-moon spoke of ways to advance the peace process with the Palestinians. Ban Ki-moon stressed that a two-state solution is the only viable approach. The Prime Minister urged the UN chief to put an end to bias against Israel at the United Nations.
The frequency of terror attacks and clashes have decreased. Yet, we must not mistake short-term quiet for a long-term solution. We must not allow difficulties to become excuses for inaction. The risk of renewed violence remains high, and sadly, attacks continue, such as the deadly shooting in Tel Aviv earlier this month. Stabbings, vehicle rammings, and shootings have only one name: terrorism. Incitement to such acts and glorification of their perpetrators are unacceptable and must stop. But, Mr. Prime Minister, security measures alone can never be enough to solve the underlying causes of the cycles of violence that the Israelis and Palestinian people have been struggling with. To do that, you need hope. You need a political horizon. You need a leadership that is committed to peace and a just and a lasting solution. We cannot ignore key underlying causes of violence: growing Palestinian anger, the paralysis of the peace process, the nearly a half-century of occupation. None of these causes justify terror. They can only be resolved through bold political action.
Israel still faces bias at the UN. I know that your desire for all countries to be treated fairly and equally remains true today. I urge you to dedicate your last 6 months as the Secretary General of the United Nations in trying to right this wrong. And when I say that, it's not just for Israel's sake, it's for the credibility of the UN.
Before meeting with Netanyahu, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon travelled to Gaza, where he called on Israel to lift its naval blockade on the Hamas-run enclave. Speaking at a press conference, he said that Israel's ongoing closure of the Gaza Strip stifles its economy and impedes reconstruction efforts. While in Gaza, he also inspected UN facilities. This afternoon, the UN Secretary-General returned to Jerusalem for his meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
The closure of Gaza suffocates its people, stifles its economy, and impedes reconstruction efforts. It's a collective punishment for which there must be accountability. Of the humiliation of the occupation and closure, but also the division between Gaza and the West Bank.
An Israeli woman was lightly injured this morning after Palestinians threw stones at Jewish worshippers praying at the Western Wall, in the third day of violent clashes raging on the Temple Mount. After assessing the situation this morning and in accordance with a Jerusalem District Court ruling, police shut down the Temple Mount to Jews and tourists until Thursday, the end of the Ramadan holiday. The security assessment came after 2 days of unrest on the Temple Mount, where a number of border policemen were injured and several Arabs arrested after masked Palestinians threw stones at Jews and tourists visiting the holy site. Israel has, in the past 2 years, halted the visits of Jews and tourists to the site during Ramadan for fear of a violent response. Police said of the 263 non-Muslim visitors to the Temple Mount on Monday, only 33 were Jewish. Returning now to the deal signed with Turkey, and while many have voiced opposition to the agreement, there are those, primarily among the business and tourism industries, who are thrilled by the announcement. Owners of companies that work closely with Turkey are optimistic that the normalization of ties will give a big boost to business.
He sent me a flag, that unite flag, like half of it is Israel and half of it is red of Turkey. And it was really nice to get. It just, like, he didn't say anything, but okay, we are happy. Now we are officially friends.
2008, 2009 was record years for Israeli traveling to Turkey. More than 500,000 people went to Turkey for holidays. And then the Marmara occurred, and we had a significant drop to 80,000.
I think this is great. I mean, there shouldn't be any problems between Israel and Turkey. There was a long history of friendship, so it's a good thing that it's back to normal.
Dennis Ross, US Middle East envoy under President Clinton, is currently in Israel for talks with top Israeli figures and politicians. Speaking during a briefing at the Jerusalem Press Club, Ross warned that Israel is becoming more isolated in the international arena, calling on the Israeli government to enact policies that would prove its commitment to a two-state solution. Earlier in the week, Ross, who currently co-chairs the Jewish People Policy Institute, addressed the cabinet.
One of the things that I said to the cabinet was that if you want to blunt the internationalization movement, if you want to expose BDS, Israel needs to take an initiative that demonstrates that its settlement policy is consistent with a two-state outcome. Meaning, if you, as the Prime Minister says, he's for two states for two peoples, You also need an approach to settlements that the rest of the world will see is consistent with a two-state outcome. Doing that could blunt what I think is a likely move towards greater internationalization. You see the French initiative. You'll see what I think are probably moves of the Security Council, maybe on a settlements resolution. If you want to blunt that, if you want to, if in a sense you want to preempt those, Israel taking an initiative that would demonstrate that its approach to two states is real because there's a tangible manifestation of how it's approaching settlements that is designed to show it's consistent with a two-state outcome, then that, I think, would take the steam out of the impulse to internationalize the conflict. And it allows Israel to shift the onus. It allows Israel to have put on the Palestinians, have the Palestinians demonstrate, all right, what is it you're doing today that shows you support two states?
Shurat Hadin is a Tel Aviv-based law group that has led the way in bringing illegal suits in international courts targeting the money behind terror groups and their sponsors. The organization recently held a conference examining Israel's international legal challenges, as we see in this report from IBA's Kalev Ben-David.
It's called lawfare, the use of legal suits in international courts to isolate and punish Israel for alleged human rights abuses. Shurat Hadin has tried to turn the table on Israel opponents by turning lawfare against those organizations and governments that sponsor terrorism or allow it to flourish. Shurat Hadin founder Nitzana Darshan-Leitner warned at the group's annual conference that Israel is facing a real threat from Palestinian efforts to see it prosecuted for war crimes at the International Criminal Court in The Hague.
If the chief prosecutor will decide that there is a case against Israel, will start an investigation, God forbid, will indict Israel for war crimes, there will be a game changer.
Your organization is now trying to make cases against Palestinian leaders over acts of terror against Israelis. How successful do you think you're going to be?
What we try to do is to deter the Palestinians from going to the court or deter the court from dealing with this issue. And we just brought the case against the Palestinians into the court. We came and claimed the Palestinian Authority is responsible for international crimes during the Intifada, during the past operations in Gaza. When you shoot thousands of missiles towards Israel, towards populated area, towards civilians, that's called genocide. And the Palestinian leaders are responsible for this act of war. We filed several complaints against the leaders of the Palestinian Authority, for the crimes against Israel, but also for the crimes against our own people, executing tens of people on the streets from their own people, also considered to be an international crime. And now when the court wants to deal with the issue against Israel, they will have to deal with the issue against the Palestinians as well.
How successful do you believe legal actions can be in order to restrict the dissemination of radical Islamic incitement on the internet, especially after incidents like the Orlando massacre?
We filed injunction against Facebook. We intend to file injunction against Twitter and YouTube as well. We're going to file monetary lawsuits when Facebook will face $1 billion lawsuit on behalf of terror victims. They will think twice whether it's pay for them to keep having pages for Ismail Haniyeh or Bakri al-Baghdadi or any other leaders of the extreme Muslim groups.
Among the international jurists attending the conference was Dr. Korir Sinjoy, a legal advisor to the government of Kenya, which in 2008 succeeded in turning away accusations of crimes against humanity brought against some of its leaders at the International Criminal Court.
I've come at the invitation of Shurat Hadin to speak in relation to Kenya's experience with the International Criminal Court. We understand the court to be motivated by politics and by the interests of a few states, rather than the imperative of justice as it prescribes itself in the statute book.
Law professor and former Attorney General of Canada, Irwin Cutler, also warned at the conference of the threat posed to Israel at the International Criminal Court.
As someone who chaired the first Parliamentary Assembly of State Parties for the International Criminal Court, and who was an early supporter and still remain a supporter of the International Criminal Court. What worries me, again, is this singling out of a member state and imposing jurisdiction where in fact it does not exist, let alone the nature of whether the offenses of which Israel stands accused arise to what is the threshold level of the gravity of the offenses required by the ICC for jurisdiction, let alone that the fact that under the complementarity principle, where Israel itself has an independent judiciary, legal system, etc., that inquires into any alleged violations of international criminal law, the ICC was not supposed to take jurisdiction when that complementarity principle is fulfilled. So what I'm saying is I can give you half a dozen reasons why the ICC should not take jurisdiction to begin with, lest it undermine the ICC itself.
The Knesset last week approved a new official national day to celebrate Aliyah as Israel experiences the highest immigration in over a decade. The Jewish agency plays a pivotal role in easing the transition of new immigrants, but as we hear in this report by IBA's Zachary Marcus, there is still a long way to go.
The Jewish Agency for Israel, centered in Jerusalem, is the largest nonprofit organization in the world, helping Jews across the world connect to their Israeli heritage since 1929. Its largest contributions have been in immigration, playing pivotal roles in the founding of the state in 1948, and today with a new spike in Aliyah, helping these people adjust to their new lives in Israel.
First, in terms of immigration, we have seen a rise in the numbers of newly arrived immigrants from Europe mostly, but also from countries like Brazil and Australia. We have welcomed to Israel last year 31,000 new immigrants, a number which sets a 15-year high. So we are now dealing with record numbers, and we need to help these people not just come to Israel, but integrate very quickly into society.
Avraham Negusi, Knesset member and chairman of the Committee for Immigration, Absorption and Diaspora Affairs, explained how necessary it is for the Israeli government to help with this process.
Those who comes from disadvantaged countries like Ethiopia or like Yemen or like India, these, for example, they have a special help in order to bridge the economic gap they have.
Negusi added that Israel's culture in particular presents extra challenges to immigrants.
And some of them remain here with the problem and struggling to overcome the challenges. And they, in order to overcome this cultural shock, there are professional people who are dealing with these people, psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, and all these are trying to help these people in order to overcome the cultural shock and the economic change in all situations.
The MK said he will continue to make efforts in the Knesset to make the process easier for immigrants coming to Israel. For IBA English News, this is Zachary Marcus.
Britain continues to reel from the aftershock of the surprise vote to leave the European Union in last week's referendum. Financial markets have begun to recover slightly after the pound dropped to a 31-year low. Trading of some shares was briefly suspended yesterday after dramatic drops, as Chancellor of the Exchequer George Osborne warned of continued volatility during this period of prolonged adjustment. The European Parliament convened today for an emergency debate on the Brexit vote.
I want my country to be internationalist, cooperative, ecological, fair, European. But please remember this: Scotland did not let you down. Please, I beg you, chers collègues, do not let Scotland down now.
Meanwhile, Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn faces a no-confidence vote after two-thirds of his shadow cabinet quit in protest at the handling of the referendum, and the Liberal Democrats have pledged to run on a platform of keeping Britain in the EU despite the referendum results. Turning to sports, and in another shock exit, the English national football team departed from the Euro 2016 championships yesterday after suffering a crushing defeat when underdog Iceland won by 2-1. While England fans mourned their loss, Icelanders celebrated the historic win as their coaches assured that the best is yet to come. Barely a week after Prime Minister Cameron resigned after losing the Brexit vote, English team manager Roy Hodgson took an exit of his own and stepped down from his position.
I'm extremely disappointed, of course, about tonight's result and ultimately our exit from the competition. We haven't progressed as far as I thought we were capable of, and that's obviously not acceptable. I'd like to thank all the support staff, players, the FA, and of course the fans. It's been a fantastic journey these 4 years, and it's one I'll look back on, I should say, or remember, with pride.
In finance, shares are up on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange and the shekel is mixed in foreign currency tradings. Here are the figures. Looking to the skies, tomorrow will be partially cloudy and it will still be warm with a slight rise in temperatures. That's all for today. Laura Cornfield will be back tomorrow. I'm Elon Aslan-Levy wishing you a good evening live from Jerusalem.